called Failed Surgery, created by Tiny Alec over on Twitter and uploaded to YouTube by Polygon. And as the name suggests, this AU deals with a reality where Dogman's surgery doesn't go well. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with the original story, basically there was a cop and his canine companion named Officer Knight and Greg the dog. And while separated, they weren't much to look at, but when they worked together, they were actually a force to be reckoned with. So the main villain of the series, who is named Petey, decided to set a trap where the pair would have to actually try to defuse a bomb, which is not successful, and it causes them to be sent to the hospital. While there, the doctors let us know that Knight's head will need to be amputated, but his body is okay, while Greg the dog's body is destroyed, but his head is okay. So the nurse in the room comes up with a plan to basically just fuse these two characters together, creating a super cop that we know as Dogman. But this AU deals with a timeline where things don't work out so smoothly. Now when the AU starts, we see that Dogman has made it through his surgery and is in bed recovering, and then a nurse comes in to check on him. And even though she only looks down at her chart for a moment, that is enough time for Dogman to quietly get out of his bed and sneak over to the side of her. We then cut over to the doctor and the chief of police, and we learn that Dogman has been knocked out for 2 weeks as his body recovers, which makes sense considering that he was literally caught in an explosion. Now, as the pair are nearly to the room, they hear a scream, and they walk in on Dogman over the bleeding nurse's body. And at this point, it's hard to tell if he actually really wanted to hurt her or if he's just confused and trying to figure out what's going on, and maybe he lashed out at her because he's not used to his new body. But seeing the other 2 men enter the room, he decided to make a run for it, dashing out into the night, but not before the news reporters outside were able to catch this image of him, looking absolutely monstrous. But one thing that I really like is how the creators swap the art styles here, and we get to see how Dogman feels. And we see that he is simply trying to escape all the eyes because he's afraid, and he's trying to find out what's going on with his body while also looking for a place that is familiar and safe. So he ends up going to someone who is familiar to both Officer Knight and Greg the dog, which is Knight's ex-girlfriend named Alice. You can even see a picture in the corner here with all 3 of them kind of looking happy together. And thinking that he'll be safe with her, Dogman comes out of the bushes and calls out to her, causing her to run away in fear. And based on how he looks in some of these images, I can't even blame her. I feel like the doctor definitely should have warned Greg's loved ones about what's actually going on with his body, just in case something like this happened. Now, Dogman doesn't fully understand why Alice is so afraid of him, so he reaches out for her and she immediately stabs him in the hand with a large kitchen knife. And this makes Dogman believe that the person in front of him is actually a demon that has done something evil to Alice, and he lashes out at her, leaving her as a bloody mess on the floor. After that, it looks like the police were able to track him down, and they actually find him crying over what's left of Alice's body, and while it may be hard to tell, it looks like he ripped her up severely. And judging by the look on his face, you can tell that he feels horrible about it. And with the fact that he's already lost so much blood and was still recovering from his surgery, the cops really have no problem putting him down with a couple of tranquilizer shots. In the next scene, we see that the mayor pops up, and they are furious, but at least they actually have a good reason to be mad this time. And she basically arrives just in time to hear the doctor explain what is going on with Dogman. And he pretty much just explains the lore of how Dogman came to be, starting by explaining how weak they were after surviving the explosion, and then revealing that they placed Greg's head on Knight's body, thinking that it would make them become like an asset to the police that they could control, just like in the original series. But of course, this version of Dogman is much more realistic, and he woke up confused and afraid, which caused him to lash out. And rightfully so, the chief of police is absolutely pissed here. Because when you think about it, even in the original books, he didn't really like Dogman, at least at the beginning. So now that he has killed or injured some people, it only makes sense that the chief doesn't want anything to do with him and more realistically wants to get rid of him. Now after that, we cut back over to Petey, who of course is the person that's responsible for all this, and he is absolutely terrified. But he has decided that he's not just going to hide forever, because once Dogman figures out that he was the one behind the bomb, he's definitely going to try to get revenge, and Petey is not trying to get ripped up. So he comes up with a plan to clone himself so that he can sacrifice the clone version to Dogman and then go on to live his life without fear. So after that, we see him kind of go through this whole process of getting ready to make a clone, but it didn't turn out the way that he was hoping. The clone came out looking more like a child version of him rather than an exact replica of his current self. And just like in the original books, the little guy thinks that Petey is his father. And if this is anything like the originals, then this is probably going to hit Petey in the heart because he was abandoned by his own father when he was a kid and lived a fairly hard life because of that. Some would even argue that the main reason that he became a villain is because he was abandoned by his father. So it'll be interesting to see how this little clone factors into this much darker universe. Now, elsewhere, we see that after some questioning, the doctor was placed behind bars, and actually good riddance to him because he definitely deserves to be in jail. After that, we see that the nurse managed to survive her injuries, but her face is marred forever, which just means that she's gonna have a bunch of scars. She'll never look the same. And then lastly, we see that the mayor has ordered that none of this should ever be revealed to the public. So with that order in mind, the chief directed for Dogman to be put to sleep. But the scientists in this AU basically ignored those orders because they felt like if they could just get Dogman under control, they could make so many more breakthroughs in science. And while he may not be dead, Dogman did wake up and was immediately forced to undergo a ton of testing, with the primary goal being to get him to follow orders. But it looks like some of the methods that they are using are a bit brutal and are just more akin to torture straight up. But since Greg was, and I suppose still is, a smart dog, he is learning quickly, but he is also becoming terrified of almost everything, but especially humans. So at this point, all he really does is just sit and rub his own head because the hand that he's using used to belong to Knight. And those are the only hands that he can actually trust at this point, which when you think about it is super depressing. Now, the ending I think is very interesting because we see that Greg and Harold are actually responsible for creating this comic, but instead of trying to make something for children, they wanted to make something a bit more gritty and a bit more edgy, right? Of course, believing that none of it will ever come true. But Melvin also pops up here and mentions that plenty of characters have come to life and there's no real reason that Dogman couldn't as well, ending this series on a bit of a dark note. All in all, I think this AU was very well done, and I especially like the fact that Dogman really didn't even want to hurt anybody. They were simply confused, scared, and trying to find somewhere safe or at least a friendly face. And it feels like the doctors and the scientists really dropped the ball when it comes to that aspect. I also like the fact that this seemed like a much more realistic outcome for the story of Dogman. This abomination of a creation doesn't become a super cop, but rather lashes out and harms a few people before they're actually able to subdue him and confine him. Now, for the people who are wondering how I think this series is going to end, I think it's pretty obvious that Dogman is going to end up getting put down. We already see that the chief of police and the mayor are not on his side, and those two alone can probably come up with a way to get rid of Dogman. But even more importantly, I don't think Dogman likes his new body or the new life that he's in this particular AU. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did something to just get himself up out of here. Go ahead and put your theories down in the comments because I'm curious to see what you guys think. And also, I know there's supposed to be some updates coming out for this one. So as they release, I'll make sure to go ahead and cover them. But as always, thank you for recommending this one for me. You guys have recommended a lot lately and they are really good, so keep it coming. And I'll make sure to cover them as quickly as I can. Make sure to go ahead and check out this video on the screen next, and we will see you tomorrow with another one. Peace, peace.